This week, we welcome political and cultural activist Ansel Wong CBE to the show. In this episode, we discuss Ansel navigating his identity and getting involved in radical student politics. We consider how these things crafted his purpose to become a leading figure in promoting the representation of Caribbean culture and arts in British society, and notably his now pivotal role in UK Black History Month and the Notting Hill Carnival. Ansel, first of all, thank you very, very much for coming along and agreeing to do this podcast. You're my second person that I've done, so when this becomes a great success, you'll be able to say I was number 2 in a series of podcasts. What I want to do is have a sort of general chat with you over an hour. And the whole theme of this podcast is success is not normal. And especially as far as I'm concerned, people from the Caribbean who've come to this country during the 50s and 60s, we know what a difficult time that was, and then really have then gone on and made a phenomenal success of themselves. And so I'm really interested to hear your story. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. Tell me, how did you come to this country and start from there?
But first of all, I want to say it's an honor and a privilege to be speaking to you and to meet you in the flesh.
Well, you see, you're making me feel like a real celebrity here. So
well, you are. You are. Come on.
Thank you very, very much.
For us and my family, definitely, so because we are ardent supporters of your sausages. So,
I really appreciate that, actually. We're going to come on to talk about my sausages because before we started this recording, you was telling me that it took you a long time to take a leap of faith. So even though you were aware of the black farmer, you didn't want to try the sausage. Tell me about that. We might as well talk about that first before we go on to you.
Yes, it's the branding and the concept of blackness that you can ascribe to a product or something else. And you sometimes approach it very skeptical. Are you on a bandwagon in terms of this concept of blackness? But what for us is quality, what for us is benefits, what for us is well-being, and so on. So whereas the politics, or my politics would say, support a black person, a black entrepreneur, like a black farmer, which was quite distinctive as well because there are not many farmers about, as you know, particularly black farmers in that sense. And then we said, okay, that's fine. So let him get on with it. Let him do his thing. That's great. We support him. But actually making the move to go into the shop and buy it was a big event,
Big leap of faith.
Big leap of faith.
Well, let me give you some idea about how the brand came about, actually, because when I decided to launch the brand, the key things about brand is to have standout. And having developed a fantastic product, the next thing was to come up with a brand name. And I was spending ages trying to think, what should I call this brand? All of my next door neighbors down in Devon, where my farmers used to call me the Black Farmer. And I thought, well, hey, that's a brand that has standout, and that there's no one else that could call themselves the Black Farmer because there's no black farmers there. And it has an edge to it. Just like you were sort of indicating to, a lot of people are not sure how they should react to something called the Black Farmer, because in this age that we live in of what is the correct language to use when you're referring to people of color, people are quite nervous around it.
Indeed.
And I think that, especially down in rural Britain, people refer to you as colored rather than black. A lot of black businesses hide their blackness because they feel people might feel that it's not a premium product, so they will call it something else. And one of the things we're going to be talking about during this podcast is purpose. And one of my purposes in life is, but how can I bring about more inclusion and diversity? How could I change perception? So by putting it out there, so it's very, very, very clear for people to know what it is, and it does cause a reaction, that actually that is fulfilling my purpose to let people know that there's a lot of, that there can be black farmers out there. And one other piece of, another bit of my story is that even before I decided to call the Black Farmer, I did a bit of research. And the research came back and says, do not call it the Black Farmer. And there's some good advice here. And that taught me that research could tell you what people were thinking yesterday. Research could tell you what people are thinking today. But research cannot tell you what people are thinking tomorrow. That's why you've got to go with your gut. You've got to go with what you believe to be right, and then people will eventually follow. So here we are, meant to be doing a podcast about you, and I've just been yakking for the last 5 minutes telling you that story. But that's how.
But that's useful because there's some parallels there. Because most of my life, I've been talking in some detail, was around opening doors for black people, and in terms of policy, strategies, and issues. I refer to it as opening the palace gates from inside.
Exactly.
And I see myself as doing that as I become successful and into the higher echelons of the society. I can't pull the ladder up. I have to open those doors, the palace doors from inside, so my contemporaries, my colleagues, my family, and everybody else can come through.
Exactly.
We all benefit.
I believe that for those of us who are lucky enough to succeed, it's our responsibility to open those gates, because no one else is opening it for them, basically. Yeah. Back to the start of your story.
Yes. Well, like most people of my generation, our educational pathway from the Caribbean to now was very much predetermined by the structure of the education system. So tertiary education was in the United Kingdom. Or to the University of the West Indies. And for some of us, particularly in Trinidad, it was also to India, to Russia, and to Canada. But most people would come to the UK for tertiary education because if you got a degree from England, your salary when you went back was higher than a degree from the University of the West Indies or Toronto or Harvard, even Harvard, yeah. So my movement and my raison d'etre for migrating and coming was to come to university. I arrived here in 1965.
So that's quite interesting then, because you're different to most then. Because
yes.
I came over in the 60s, but the story is my parents came over first, and then they asked for my sister and I to come over, and we joined them, and then we became part of that immigrant group. But you particularly came here for the education.
That was the pathway for us, those of us who were in education. Tertiary education was in the United Kingdom. And as I said, some people went different ways through scholarships or through ethnic connections. Like some people went to India, to universities. Russia recruited very much for that time. Because what you got to understand, around that time, it was part of Britain's strategy and a policy to build elite from it. What has been referred to as doctor politics. So around that time, all the politicians in the Caribbean had doctorates from United Kingdom universities, yes, because that was tradition. That was the pathway. You went here, educated, came back, led the country. And Britain saw the benefits of that, to have people in position of power that they can influence and get involved. So I came here in 65 as part of that.
And how old were you?
I was about 18,
so
17,
you came
18.
of age. So the first time you came to this country was as an 18-year-old?
Yes.
Okay.
And straight to university. Went to Hull in Yorkshire, which was quite an experience, as you know.
Cold.
Hull, cold as well.
Yeah.
And as well as it was a kind of cultural revelation for us as a Caribbean person who has been taught very much within a colonial mentality in that way, because our education system was the exact replica of the British system. So the college I went to was a replica of Eton. So we had houses, we had boarding, and we had all the kind of infrastructure and cultures and nuances of that education. So I had my fag, and I was as head boy, and there was this, I was head of house and so on. So all of those traditions you inculcated without really realizing.
Is this in Trinidad?
Yes, in Trinidad, yes.
So in Trinidad, you went through what they'd call the public school system that replicated in Trinidad. So you did that. So you would have gone to one of the posh schools in Trinidad, as they called it, and then...
Yeah, one of the schools. I guess you could call it posh in the sense that it was probably second rate, because the top schools were the Catholic schools. Yes. And this was a Presbyterian school, which was set up specifically for the Indian population in Trinidad. And because of Asian flu, I missed the opportunity for the entrance exam for the Catholic school. So and I said, there's no way I'm going to an Indian school. Yes. But when my brother heard that on the day of the exam, told my mom took me into a cab off to the college to do the exam. I won a scholarship, and that's the end of that. Yes.
Now let me just focus a bit on that. So you're brought up in Trinidad. and you would have been associated with the Asian background in Trinidad. And so one of the things I find interesting about the Caribbean is that you have people who would have originally came from Asia. And so in your case, it would have been from China, is that right?
Yes, I mean, it was a real mix-up, what we call kalalu. It's a real mix-up because even within my family, there were different dimensions of that. So that my father came from China. He was an actual migrant from China, from Guangdong province in China.
That's saying I've got Chinese in my background as well. Yeah,
okay.
I can't remember what province, but yeah. There's a lot. That mix-up is really interesting.
Yes.
So he was. So was he an indentured worker? Or
No, he migrated to Trinidad. Came in there.
Why did the Chinese man decide to go from China to Trinidad?
I really don't know. We never found out. And he came and he met my mother. My mother is a mixture of indigenous Carib, Spanish, and African. And he grew out of that.
So it's a real mix-up.
Yes.
That is.
Not only that, after he died, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my mother remarried a Hindu.
Okay.
So I grew up in a Hindu household most of my life.
So what's really interesting for me, because one of the reasons I like to go back is to find out really what is it in your childhood that really prepared you for what you ended up doing. Now, where did you belong? Because the thing about the Caribbean is that, where you belong, different shades of color really is quite important. So how did you place yourself?
That was very, very important because you had to find a space for yourself. And your communities, your traditional communities, would push you in different directions. So that the Chinese community was there and they would be pushing you in direction. Even though, as far as I was concerned, I didn't look Chinese, I wasn't Chinese, I only had the name. As a matter of fact, a little story about that. In my birth certificate, I should be called Wang Fong. But as a child, you're not going to call yourself Wang Fong because you're not Chinese. So I dropped the Fong. So up to this day, all my documentation shows that my proper name and full name is Ansel Wong Fong. And sometimes that gets into difficulty because when I'm asked from anybody else to produce my birth certificate, it shows that I am not Ansel Wong. But because of the as you said, the kind of color thing and ethnicity thing, I had to find a space where I could sit comfortably and still engage with all the different communities. I think I did that fairly well because wherever I go, I had an open view of the people. I didn't feel that there were any kind of characteristics or demographic that precluded me from participating and benefiting.
So you had the Asian community, the Indian community, the black community.
Yeah.
So you didn't belong to any of those then?
I didn't feel that I necessarily belonged to all of those, but I felt the pressures from the different communities to do things. So again, a little anecdote. When I came to the UK and I would go back to Trinidad on holidays, I was greeted by representatives of the Chinese community who said, well, you're coming back, you're educated, you got a degree. We want to set you up in business, yes, because too many people are taking positions and Chinese people are not getting that opportunity. So they wanted me to do that. And I was very disappointed because I couldn't see myself in that situation, in that position. I certainly didn't see allegiances in that way. But yet, here with the community making that demand of me because I came back with a degree.
And you had the Chinese surname, so
Yes,
they thought
yes.
he's one of us.
But that's what they said, because my father was a famous gambler. Yes, so he was well known in the community, and therefore his name, to carry the name forward, they felt they had an obligation to him to look after his children.
So they wanted you to do that, and so you had to resist that. So
Yes.
And then, because part of the theme I'm looking for is about actually how you have to be prepared to be abnormal, not fit into what people want you to do in order to go and achieve the things that you want in life. But before we get to that, so you come over to this country, 18 years old, you then go and live and get educated in Hull. And even to this day, there's not many people of color in Hull. So how were you received when you arrived in the 60s?
It's interesting. But we did have a little number of overseas students, African and Caribbean students. And we formed, as usual, at any university, Caribbean societies. And we established that kind of link and camaraderie among each other. But we were very much visibly different in Yorkshire, in Hull, in Humberside. That was interesting in itself because there were different elements of trying to integrate us into the society. And sometimes we stood out, sometimes we engaged. I mean, classic example is that there's an expectation that you can play cricket. There's an expectation that you can sing calypso. There's an expectation that you could play steel band. And I could never do any. But we did it for fun. So we set up the British Council looked after us. We set up a cricket team, British Council team. And the first match we played against a university, we beat them.
All right. So it's one of the interesting things about actually, one of the things of if you're a person of colour, there are the stereotypes that you're always constantly having to fight against. So
But the dilemma is, and they were asking, why with your skills you don't join the main team and become part and parcel? Because
when you say join the main team, what main team?
The university team.
Oh, the main.
Yes, because we were the British Council team.
Okay.
And the university had its team, the cricket team, and we were beating them easily in a cricket match.
And they wanted you therefore to join the university's team. So why didn't you join?
Well, for cricketers was fun. So we would play with our normal shoes and no whites and that sort of things. So it wasn't the discipline of the game. We didn't embrace, and we would play for fun because you join a university team, you have to follow rules, regulations, and standards. Yes, so we weren't prepared for that. Yes.
Again, you see, I'm trying to pick up threads and themes. So there's something that is confident in yourself that you don't feel as though you've got to belong. You want to do something. There's two examples you've just given me. One about the Chinese wanting you to do business. You're saying, no, that's not for me. And also not wanting to be part of the cricket team. That's starting to build a picture of your sort of very strong character in identifying with the sort of things that you want to do. The other thing I'm interested in is this. So you're in Britain at that time where there's a lot of racism going on. But in a sense, you are protected from that because you came to this country for one reason, that was to get an education, not to necessarily, live here. So you have a totally different expectation and you're probably more educated. What was it like in that sort of environment at that time?
I think it was very true what you said because I used the phrase, we all came here to earn, learn, and return. I came here, I did earn, I did learn, but I didn't return. I decided to stay. And yes, in the 60s and the 70s was a heightened Black Power movement as well. There was my own interest in theology because one of the subtexts of my migrating to here was to become a Jesuit priest. Because of my willingness to look at liberation theology that was happening in Latin America, and being a Catholic boy, as a Catholic boy, it's appealed to me, yes, academically, that concept, and at the same time, losing my faith and becoming more radical, and as you become more radical, you question the existence of God, yes. And all that was happening at the same time as the radicalism that was happening around me in terms of Black power, Black consciousness. Then there are issues as you went to universities around the achievements and identity of people within your community. And I thought all of that was influencing my thinking and so on. And at the same time, I got involved in the Black politics of the USA because I used to go over to Harlem in Yorkshire to run a community project there.
Harlem in
New York.
In New York,
yes.
So let me break that down for this. So this is back to that theme about not being normal. Now, what is in your spirit, your soul, that you want to champion these things, that you want to find out about it? I'm trying to figure out where they come from. Was your father, was your parents, was anybody interested in this? So where did all this interest come from?
I don't know. Maybe there was a lot of individuals in my life who influenced my thinking, my teachers, the people around me and I valued that and enjoyed that. So through the theatre, through literature and so on, you're reading a lot of these things, and it sparks that kind of imagination and that response for you. So it was that kind of interest, mostly around the arts.
So is that here or was back in Trinidad?
Trinidad and here. So when I came here, I got involved in that in very very distinctive ways. So I had set up one of the first black theatre companies in London, working with young people called the Black Arts Workshop.
Okay, but this is where I got to stop, because the way you say these things, you say them as it's normal.
Yes,
I
it
mean,
was normal.
But it's not. It's, I mean, you have to have drive and energy to do these sort of stuff. So what I'm trying to do is that the things that you're probably taking as normal, because again, if you think of the climate at that time, you're a black guy where there's a lot of negativity about people of color. Or did you not have that experience because people weren't able to place you? I mean, I'm just trying to understand where it came from, because you're treating it as something that's normal, but it isn't.
No, it isn't. In that sense, I felt confident in myself that nobody could throw anything at me that I can't handle. All right. So the individual acts of racism I confronted with some ease. Walking down the street with my white girlfriend and people spitting on the side of the pavement in Yorkshire, Cottingham, was something that you accepted. Leave it. Going to the cinema, and as a Trinidadian, when you go to the cinema and they play the national anthem, you stand up to show respect. And to discover in Hull, at the cinema in Hull, when they started to play the national anthem, people started to walk past me. English people, white people. And then to add insult to injury, the projectionist decided to wind it down. So that kind of made me wonder where I am, who I am, how did I feel, because I came with that kind of understanding. So I can take all of those things, rationalize it, and think, all right, I can move forward with this. But what I would not do is allow it to knock me down.
Okay. Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to get to. What is it about your soul, your spirit, that allows it not to knock you down? Because that makes you exceptional. Because a lot of people, it really did knock them down. It did hold them back. Do you have brothers and sisters, for example?
Yes.
What are their lives compared to yours?
We're more or less of a similar nature, because we had a very strong matriarch, our mother. I think probably that was it, because she not only held the family together, she, within the community, there were people who were complete strangers that would send their children to her to be brought up properly, until in my older age, I realized that people I thought was my sisters and brothers were not, no blood relatives, but they were living with us because they were a handful and they were sent for whatever reason by people, and my mother brought them up. So I grew up in this kind of extensive family, assuming that we were all related, blood related. And she's the one that actually determined all the sort of things. And the messages in your head was there, going out with girls and in the evening and going out with girls. I mean, I remember her saying to me, pulling me aside and saying, "You going with that girl? Whatever you do to her, somebody's going to do to your sister. So you treat her like you would want somebody to treat your sister." And that's a lesson I learned. A simple little thing like that I learned. And I learned how to behave and how to look at each other in a different way. And I think perhaps, as you're forcing me to think this actually, that might be some of the reasons.
Okay, so this is what gave you a sort of a confidence in self. So your mother seems to be quite a dominant sort of influence in that.
Yes.
Okay.
Disciplinarian and role model.
What you're describing really is that the greatest gift you could give a child is not an education, it's confidence. Yeah. Confidence in terms of self. So you come over here, you do your degree at Hull, then what happens?
Well, I started getting involved in community things, in politics.
But again, so why? Because, why not business? Why community things? What is the...
I think because I was trying to find a home and a settlement. So we had the West Indian Students Centre in London.
So when you say we, what are we talking about? Is that a role?
Students from the Caribbean. We all came, and all the Caribbean governments contributed to the existence of the centre in Earl's Court. And it was supposed to be a student centre where we would all come whenever it's break time and so on. And that was a nucleus, a network that put all us together. And it also created a Caribbean identity. Because before coming to the UK, I've never met a Jamaican in my life. But I met all those other people from the Caribbean here in London. So you developed your Caribbean identity here. And therefore, being in that group of students, like most students, you get into the radical politics. So I was a member of the Radical Student Alliance, which was a kind of radical group that,
So what's interesting here then is that you then found your tribe,
Yes,
a sense
exactly.
of belonging.
Yes,
So
yes.
when you arrived here, you then found a sense of belonging, and that's where we then have the we. The basis of this group was to do what? What was your aim?
Well, because we looked at our position, one of the first dilemma we faced is that we were seen by the community as privileged. We came as students here with money paying and that sort of things. And so therefore, we sometimes are at loggerheads with the community as such. That's people outside of the student body, so you had to find a rationale for your existence. Are you a privileged student supported by the government back home, or are you going to be engaging with the community who are experiencing levels of disadvantage, levels of discrimination, and so on? So the two started to come and encroach into each other, and your commitment and activism and engagement began to grow. And that's what happened. Mine grew around the arts, the creativity, theatre, dance, music, literature.
And what did you want to achieve with this?
I just wanted to enjoy myself, because I came from that background, from the from my college, with that background in literature and the arts. I just wanted to enjoy it, and also, in a sense, to make a name for us. Yes, because I started to engage with all the artists, because at that time the Caribbean artist movement was established in the West Indian Student Center. So people like Andrew Solke, Edward Brayfith, John LaRose, and all the writers who used to come there. Yeah,
Is this in Hull or is this in London?
No, this is London, Earl's Court. It became a focal point for creatives and the writers and so on, and the politicians. Yeah. So anytime anybody came, whether it's a prime minister, they would come to talk to the students.
So prime minister from the
Any country,
from
any Caribbean country,
because
this is their center. They're paying for this, and they want to talk to the students. Yes.
Okay, fine. So you come from Hull, you create the centre in Earl's Court, and it becomes a sort of focal for Caribbean people to come and see excellence by the signs of it. Okay, and then and how is this funded then? This organisation?
Each Caribbean government. A subvention from each. I'll keep it going, and you'll be a warden. Then there will be facilities there, a restaurant and a library and so on. So you can come there and read all the newspapers from Jamaica and Trinidad and so on. And during your break time, holidays, and then you come down and hang out. Yeah.
Okay.
And there'll be events, lectures, all the sort of things. Yes.
So you did that, and then what?
Continued to do that, then got involved in my, after my first degree, wanted to become a teacher, deciding, well, look, I think I could make a life here in England. And when I did my postgraduate work in education and started to teach. Yeah.
So how did your parents and everybody in the Caribbean feel when you decided not to go back?
Well, a lot of elements of my family were already resident here and settled here, so it was easy to me to do so. My mother, being the dominant, was making sure that I do something worthwhile, because I started to dabble with dance. I got involved with the ballet rambe and the plays doing modern dance. So I was veering towards becoming a dancer. My mother made it very explicit and very clear to me she didn't pay in any money for me to come to England to dance. So,
it sounds like a classic Caribbean word. Oh, this money I spent for you to go to dance. Go dance. You can't be doing it.
I love the arts and literature and writing and so on, and theatre. I had my own theatre group. I started to work with all the black actors and actresses. Bludgeoning at the moment. Appeared in a few theatre shows and that sort of thing. So I was on this verge of all of these little things until it was made very clear to me, that's not a career.
You got to go and do that. So what did you do then? What was so?
Well, teaching was my main thing, and getting involved.
Where did you? What sort of was it? School? Was it university? And what?
No. I went into secondary school.
And where did you teach?
I teach at Sydenham Girls in Sydenham, near Forest Hill, girls' school, and then.
So what was that like then? Again, being a black teacher.
Yeah.
ain't normal in those
No,
days.
and not only a black teacher, there's one of the biggest afros.
The black teacher, you had a big afro.
Yes.
And so again, to have the audacity to do that. What was that experience like?
That experience was quite challenging in some respects, because you were there, and there you were a teacher. And one of the major things is, because I had a degree in English and I was teaching English, I wasn't allowed to teach the lower streams where most of the black kids were. So I was teaching English and studies, some studies I read was, but literature and English, and I felt isolated, because I'm engaging with the kids. They see me about as a black teacher. They were coming up towards me, but I wasn't teaching them at all. So I felt, well, I have to do something. This doesn't make sense. And at that time, we were concerned about levels of achievement, GCSEs and A levels and so on. We're not achieving it. Also with issues around identity, and there were little problems within the school as well. So there were problems between the African students and the Caribbean students, and the conflicts that was going on between those two. So I had to bring all of those factions together. And as a black teacher, I was seen as the firefighting person, dealing with all of those issues, because even the headmistress looked to me to mediate and to bring all of these things together. And I tried to do all of that. I created a Caribbean club for the girls, and we created something called the Fourth World Club. Women as the fourth world, not the third world, the fourth world. So we brought all of these people together, and that was my activism. So started all of those things. I established a dance company, a dance group, teaching them how Caribbean dance, and we performed at other schools and so on. So my role as a black teacher took on a different kind of status. And there were problems, obviously, with that, where you were seen they were depending on you to adjudicate. So, for example, the school said no jewelry. Girls not supposed to wear jewelry, rings and bangles and so on, but particularly bangles. And then there's this one girl who loved her bangles, said, no, I have to wear this bangles. This is part of my culture and history. Ask Mr. Wong. He will tell you the truth. So I was then placed in that situation where, do I follow the school rules and say no bangles, or do I take on this bludgeoning cultural awareness among this young girl in terms of her identity? And then I had to mediate between all of those things. Yes.
And what was the conclusion in that case?
The conclusion was talking to the headmistress and said, look, this particular person was very, very challenging. Very, very challenging in the school. Not many teachers could cope with her, but I coped with her well. And now she's one of my most successful students. Yeah.
Did she wear a bangle?
Yes.
Oh, she kept her bangle. The other thing you said is that you weren't allowed to teach the lower stream kids. Why was that then?
Because the way they did the school scheduling, they put you into the top streams because you had a degree, one of the few people with a degree in English.
Okay. So you career, then being a teacher, then what?
At the same time, teaching in the evenings and other times getting involved in community politics and seeing what was happening in the community and getting engaged and doing other things that was happening all around. And there was a lot, because during those times there was a lot of activism and activity. So I got involved in that, talking to people, setting things up, and mediating and doing all of that. I became very, very active in the community around that. I had joined a radical left-wing group called the Black Liberation Front, and we started to look at alternatives to it. So we set up a housing association, Ujima Housing Association, which turned out to be one of the largest housing associations in the United Kingdom. We set up issues around coping with homelessness among our young people. As you know, one of the problems we had was parents came into direct conflict with their children over how they were behaving. If I tell you to get home by 11 o'clock at night and you're not getting home 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you can't live under my roof because you're rebelling.
Yeah.
Leave. So there was an element of homelessness. There was issues of identity and self-identity. So I was always trying to find ways of dealing with that.
Okay.
And
So
coping.
what's interesting is that what is it about you that took on this? There's a real sense of responsibility to be taking on all of this. Where does that come from?
I felt if I had the capacity, if I had the capability, and if I had the time, I had to. You felt that you had to.
Yeah, but why? You could take somebody else from your same background who would have just really focused around themselves rather than the sense of responsibility towards others. Is it again because you felt that you're from privilege and therefore in order to feel comfortable with yourself, you had to do these other things?
There was an element of that in the sense that I know I was okay in terms of my own survivability, in terms of my own belief and my understanding. And I felt that I had an overview of the situation that we were all facing, and I didn't see myself as a victim.
You
So
see,
that's
one
the
of the
most
things you said
important
earlier on,
piece, yes.
you said that you came over with that intention of being a Jesuit priest, because everything you seem to be doing is what a Jesuit priest would be doing. So even though I don't know whether you officially became one or not.
No.
but-
I lost my faith.
You lost it, but you are doing
Yes.
the sort of stuff one would expect someone of belief to do in terms of, living a life to sort of help others rather than feel for themselves. So I'm just wondering whether you may have lost your belief, but you're still
Maybe.
living your belief.
Maybe, but when you're forcing me to look back in a way I haven't done before. And yes, it is true that even in my childhood and in Trinidad, there was that element that we should be helping others. And we are doing all right. We have an onus and responsibility to help others. And the other members of the family, as well as other people as well. So that is why our home was always like a meeting place for people, other members of the family, and it's simple little incidents, like one of my nephews would get drunk one night because he went out and he couldn't go back home, so the only way he would come is to our house and to my mom, he had to climb through the window, and my mom would put him to sleep next to her on the floor. And it's little things like that had an impact on me.
Yeah, and then you see, so sort of subconsciously, not being aware of it, it's also building up this sense that actually there's a need to look after and help other sort of people, which has been a sort of driver in your life. So you're teaching, you're doing all of that. So tell me about your personal life then. So when did you get married?
I had this 1977. I had this theatre group, Black Arts Workshop, with young people who wanted to get into theatre. We did a lot of poetry readings and dance and all sort of things around the thing. And I was trying to develop what I call a black aesthetic, the concept of defining what is the concept of black beauty. And many of those young women and men joined the organization and developed that. One individual I took a liking to and got into a relationship, and we've had that relationship going since 1977.
Okay, we'll try and be a bit more romantic than that, So to do you men, you're not very romantic. So where was she from then? What was hers?
She's a mixture of Nigerian and British, yes, a mixed race, yes. She's very attractive, physically attractive, and therefore she had that kind of thing. I guess as a male, you felt you got attracted to somebody that's not touched.
All right. So what I like to do in these conversations is to try and join up the dots, because a lot of people think that what happens in their life is by accident, and it's only by going back you could see where things sort of connect. So we've already sort of realised that actually,
that's true. Yes.
That what you've ended up doing really started off from your mother. Is your mother still alive? Or
No.
Okay.
No.
She was a real imprinted the sort of ideals within you, and that's what you sort of ended up spending your life sort of doing. One of the questions I want to ask you is that you're the sort of in diverse Britain, you're the sort of person that could fit in anywhere, because people they will see colour, but they would not necessarily see you as black. How does that feel? And how is that then, when you're talking to other black people, how do they then see you? Do they see you as being part of the struggle, or do they see you as being privileged? And again, your surname as well, in a sense, separates you. So I'm just interested. You spend you probably do more within the black community than I do. I'm just wondering how you're received.
Very, very interesting, because it's surfaced more recently, and I refer to it as black liquidity, is as a concept of a kind of continuum, a black continuum, and it's around also the way we are defined, how we define black, or we define BAME, and so on. And now the current terminology is the global majority. And I have a real issues with how we define ourselves and who define it for us. And you're right that at certain stages of my engagement and activism, I was accepted as black or black Chinese. That was often used as well. But there was very little opportunity or evidence of people just dismissing me as not being part and parcel of the process because of my leadership role, I presume. And it was easy. If I was just an ordinary member of things, it might have been more difficult. So I had to find ways of justifying myself, linking up with that issue of where do I sit? Am I Chinese? I am black, or I'm Asian, or mixed race, or whatever. Finding identity. And I link to this concept of liquidity that goes right across the board, and therefore I span all of those things, so I can sit easy in any kind of environment, and you can't dismiss me or in any way whatsoever, because I can fit in where there. So that kind of arrogance, perhaps, that I can be there, I should be there, I ought to be there, and I will be there. Yeah.
And do you think then you are trusted more by the host community, that you are trusted by the people in power, because they're not able to identify you specifically as one thing?
I think over the latter years, where my voice is less strident, because as a youth, a young student, you got in politics and demonstrations and so on. You're all into that kind of aggressive, demanding situation. But now I at ease in fitting into whatever structure there is, whether it's a government working department or government committee or talking to a minister, whatever. I'm at ease in that because I have the niceties of how to cope with that and where to find my place in that situation. So therefore, I'm perhaps accepted as an acceptable voice or acceptable face of the black community. Yeah.
So basically, you've learned, in order to get things done, that you need to be accepted by the people with the power,
and how to navigate the different levels that exist. Where to find at ease, where to push, where not to push, how to respond, and looking at the nuances of relationships that exist that inform power. So the opportunity to be with a minister and talk to him or her and still engage with him. A good relationship I have with our current king, to talk to him and understand where we're coming from and develop that kind of relationship. I'm at ease in terms of that. Yeah.
So you're trusted.
Yes.
Trusted.
Yeah.
So if we then go on to the work that you do, the Notting Hill Carnival, tell me about how that came about and what do you do for that?
Well, it's again coming out from my Trinidadian connection, because I said when you come over here, there's an expectation what you can do. I was engaged. It's a carnival. It's a tradition from Trinidad and Tobago. So when you migrate to the UK, you're looking for something similar, right? And it was there. And I wanted to get involved because I like the festival and I see that as an expression of our community, of our Trinidadian community. So it was very easy for me to fit into that because I was doing community work, working with young people on the Harrow Road in Maida Vale, and therefore developing that understanding and saying to them, look, this is an opportunity for us to do something positive Yeah, because the center I was working in had a extremely bad reputation and relationship with the Harrow Road police station. It's a notorious police station in West London. And we were right opposite, obliquely opposite to the station. So when I was appointed as a director to redevelop that and make sure that the relationship with the police is mediated, Carnival provided an opportunity for us to develop the capabilities of our young people.
So just go back to Carnival. So was Carnival existing before
Yes,
then?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
So what
yes.
was it like then? And then how did you then make a difference when you were involved?
Well, we first started off with, again, because my theatrical thing, I worked with the young people and we made a film, a Super 8 film of Carnival. And then the next step was, okay, we've done it. Why don't we get involved? Then you got to find a way of how to get involved in the carnival, and got the young people to involve. Because again, my skills were not particularly well developed in that way in terms of creative things. So you learned, yeah. And the other thing you had to do is you never admit your deficiency. Yes. So I would go and research and check things out and so on, then come back and deliver to the young people. So a simple thing like a T-shirt, which we wear at the carnival. How do you print it? Whether you do potato printing or stencil printing, whatever, you have to learn it, and then you come back and you teach them. So that's how I got involved and started to develop again and again, watching others, copying, and then coming back and working with those young people and developing their capacity. So I was at ease in transitioning from one to the other, and therefore developing my leadership role in that direction.
But trying to be involved in something like Carnival, I mean, there's so many different interest groups. I mean, it is a bit like trying to get, tons of different ideas all sort of centrally working. I mean, how did you find that sort of experience?
It's an interesting experience, but it's an experience that I anticipated because of the nature of our Caribbean community, and I didn't necessarily align myself.
What would you say the nature of Caribbean communities are?
That factionalize,
yes,
and we bringing down each other very quickly, fighting.
Everybody wants to be in charge.
Yes, they always want to be somebody of the top one. For whatever reason. And there were several committees that fractured, split, and so on. But I was at ease at all of them because I knew all of the individuals involved in those committees. I was able to relate to them without necessarily seeming to be a fervent advocate of one. So therefore, I had that role as a fixer. Yeah, because I people was important. Yeah, not necessarily their views. So whoever they are, I may like them or not like them, but in the end, for me, it's our art form, it's our culture that's more important than the factionalism of our community. And that's what drove me to find a space and to mediate and be at ease in all the different factions. Because it was difficult. Sometimes you had meetings where they ended up fighting, physically fighting.
Yes, I know. Yes. You know. So I tell you what is really interesting talking to you is that it's a lack of ego.
Yeah.
And because you have a lack of ego, then people feel as though they could trust you.
Yeah.
And because you're not there to sort of further your own sort of position in life, it's really this big sense of trying to make the community benefit.
Yeah.
So it is, I don't know, you keep saying you've lost your faith, but that sounds to me that is a sort of a person of faith does, really, is that they strip away ego for the greater good.
Yeah. And I do that because I like to work behind in that sense, with helping each other. So with a lot of people, famous people who would do their reports, I would write the reports and they would present it to the international community as their report.
So you are comfortable in being number two
and
being in the background?
And total ease with that. And I don't want any kudos, I don't want any recognition for that. I mean, on my computer, I have all the documents that I've written. When I die, probably that may become evident and people realize all those various international reports
And so
That
you
is,
are well known from, I would imagine prime ministers, royalty, and all that. How have you formed those relationships? Why are those people interested in talking to you?
Well, we have an interesting relationship with the royal family, Prince Charles particularly, because of the willingness to engage with the black community. And I was just one member of that black community. And wherever we wanted to help, then I was able to produce reports, briefings, so he could understand aspects of the black community, like the concept of Rastafarianism, which I did, and provide that for them. So they know they can come to me for that. Yes.
And the theme of my podcast are success is not normal. Mm-hmm. Okay. Where would you see the abnormality in your career? And don't tell me you're normal, because everything you've done,
Abnormality in that sense. I don't know. I mean, my wife would say, something you don't make any money out of it. And that is an abnormality. Everything you do for free and willingly, and even deadlines, yes. So, somebody have a lecture to give on Wednesday, and I'll get a call. I need a lecture on Wednesday to talk to some politicians. I produce it. I produce the speech, yeah.
And so in terms of your personal purpose, because one of the things I'm always looking for in people is, what is their personal purpose? Mm-hmm. What do you think your personal purpose is?
To elevate and to commemorate and celebrate us as black people. And anything I can do for an individual or for the community as a whole to put us in that good light, and to make sure that the pathway is there to happen.
It's a lot of responsibility. Not enough. There's not many people of color that's doing exactly that. So that's what makes you abnormal, actually.
Yes, but only where I'm comfortable doing it. I'm not going to say that I'm here to do it all the time. I'm kind of responsive as well. So people would come to me and say, "Look, I need this." Yes.
So you have this big need to elevate black people, and that sense of responsibilities come from a very, very young age. And that is so you're not about making money.
No, yes.
You're about actually doing what you can to sort of elevate black people. Yeah. How do you think you've done in that?
Well, I think I have always been a helping hand for a lot of individuals as well as organizations, and I'm willing to do that without any demands or anything at all. So if I have the capability, if I have the capacity to do it, I will do it without question. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. Certainly, my family think it's time to step back now a bit.
And of all the things that you've done, which of those, what are you most proud of?
I think one of the things is the life changes and the interventions I made for certain individuals who are now professionals. Had I not intervened in their lives, they may not have become what they have become.
Give me an example. You don't have to give names, but give me an examples.
We referred to the student before. She's now has a doctorate in medical doctorate.
What's the backstory of the student?
She was the most difficult students.
This is you're referring back to your days as a class. This is your bangle story.
Yes, African.
She's an African who wanted to wear a bangle. Yeah.
Yes, and shortest skirt you can find in
secondary school. So she was a rebel. This girl.
Very much a rebel.
Yeah.
And confronted me as well, quite vociferously. But I worked with her. Regardless, I worked with her. And she. So
that's what's really interesting. So. Most people would have given up with somebody like her. Yeah. They would just, she would have been chucked out of the school. So,
yes.
So there must be something in you that decided that you would, do the hard work to help turn this girl around.
Yes, well, you sometimes you see the potential, but not. I don't want to give you the impression that all of that was all very successful. There are a lot of opportunities where I failed in that way, because one particular girl I remember who would have been a fantastic soprano. She had that voice, but there was no way I can get her to take on board that. It was totally divorced from her milieu, from her ambience and everything else. But listening to her, speaking to her, I can just see her on the stage singing. Yeah. And I tried my best, but she was into petty crime and so on. And it didn't work. And
so what happened to her eventually?
I don't know. I don't know what happened to her.
So that's one of those opportunities that
That's
somebody
totally missed.
that-
Yes.
Well, that's not your responsibility, you see, because I always think that the thing we could do as individuals offer opportunity,
Yeah.
and then it's down to the individual about whether they do something with that individual. But the success story, I'm going to call her Mrs. Bangle.
Yes.
Whatever happened to her then?
She's still around and she's still in touch.
And what does she do?
She's a medical doctor. Yeah.
So she went on to university
Yes.
and
yes.
Then qualified as a doctor.
Yes.
And that you
she's-
feel that if you hadn't intervened, she could have gone in a different direction.
I would think so. Definitely. Yes.
And does
Yes,
she?
yes.
How does she feel about your intervention?
Oh, she speaks highly and publicly when she speaks. She also mentions it that if it wasn't for this man, I wouldn't be here.
Well, see,
I
what's
think
quite
that's-
interesting then, really, about this podcast is that as a teacher, you are in a powerful position where you could really make a difference to people's lives. And what it sounds like, it's not about the education, it's about how you refer to them as human beings, how you understand them and make allowances for their personalities in order for them to sort of grow. That is what I think is quite interesting. So from your perspective, seeing a lot of young people, what do you think are the defining factors for those who go on to achieve greatness, who become entrepreneurs? What do you think those things are that separates them from everybody else?
I think is the continuity of the engagement that I was able to offer, because you can offer them and put them in the right direction. But I never gave up. I was persistent. Around that time, those 70s and 80s also was a lot of mugging. I don't know if you remember that. A lot of those young people used to be mugging people. And we felt very strongly, I felt very strongly that shouldn't be a career pathway for young people. And it meant simple things like going up to the West End and meeting up with those girls, because at that time they started to get into prostitution, and to get them away. And the struggle I had to do that, because I remember one case, I took her off the street and took her into a wimpy bar. I was sitting down talking, and she said, "You want me to go back to school to do what? What I'm going to do? Be in Woolworth?" And she put her hands in her pocket and she put out a wad of money. She said, "I made that in half an hour. What are you offering me? What can I do?" And I didn't have an answer, because the financial aspect was more important to her. And here was I trying to get her back to school. Yeah. And I remember that very distinctly. I was so disappointed because I didn't have an answer.
Well, I suppose for me, the answer would be, and it's one of the issues that young people have today, is that it's about a long-term benefit compared to an immediate benefit. So you can make a lot of money now, but that's not going to last forever. You're going to get old, or something's going to happen. It's that. So it's about it's a bit like people setting up their own business or entrepreneurialism. It's all about it's a marathon. It isn't a sprint.
It is, yes.
And I think that success is a marathon. It's about people actually coming to terms with the fact that actually, in order to get the future you want, you have to invest and see that it's pretty sort of long term, really. So that for me is what's quite interesting. So what I just want to finish off with this then is that when you look back at your life, what are your great achievements and what are your great failures as far as you're concerned?
I don't know. I think my great achievements is developing the capacity of certain individuals, young individuals, whether as writers or as dancers or as artists. Yes, particularly recently in Carnival, young people who are designers and become good designers and developing that work. Somebody like Melissa Simon Hartman, who has designed for Beyonce, and she started us when she was 8 years old, and helped to nurture her. So I'm really pleased about the costume and the creativity and the innovation of the style that has happened, because you hear Carnival and you hear statistics about crime. You hear Carnival, you don't hear about the creativity and the innovation of the artistry of the or designers. And for me, that is something I continue to campaign for. Hopefully, I will increase that opportunity for everybody to do so. Young people.
What about regrets?
Regrets, that's a really difficult one, really. I would have liked to see a greater development in some of the things we were trying to do in developing the opportunity for people to choose institutions and to be successful in those institutions that we were developing. We wanted to create entrepreneurial opportunities for people to come together based on what the Jamaican call han, or what Trinidadian call susu, where it's coming together to pool financial resources and to create an opportunity. We tried that with a minicab, trying to set up a minicab company, or getting all our black people to drivers and to contribute to that. And there were other opportunities, like to make a bakery, so to choosing things that we felt our community wanted to do, yeah? And in a sense, it's like the black farmer, essentially, creating that niche and to develop that niche into excellent standards. And the one regret, I never made one success in that area.
And is there, my final question to you then, is there one thing you'd like to achieve before you leave this life?
Never thought of that. Yes. I have a kind of laissez-faire attitude towards things like that. I'm comfortable with where I am. I don't have any overarching ambitions. Yeah. I would like to know that when I go, I leave a certain element of financial independence for my family and for people, yeah, so that they don't have to struggle when I've left, yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very, very much for joining me on this podcast. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. You have been listening to myself, Wilfred Emmanuel Jones, or better known as the Black Farmer. This was the Success is Not Normal podcast. Stay tuned for the next week's episode.